Hey friends, today I'm going to be interacting with some questions that came in through a recent Q&A that I did. And all of the questions on today's show have to do with words and the misunderstandings that can happen when we're defining words very differently from one another. How many times have you been in a conversation that just goes south and you don't realize why until later? It dawns on you that you and the person you were talking to are talking about the same thing, but you're defining it very, very differently. Well, that is a huge problem in our culture, especially surrounding hot button, hot topic words like love, justice, tolerance, truth, authenticity. We're going to talk about all of it today, how we can cut through the chaos and the confusion with clarity and biblical truth. And before we do that, though, I want to let you know about a couple of things coming up. Number one, if you're not subscribed to the Unshaken Faith podcast, I really want to encourage you to subscribe to that. That is a podcast that I do with my friend Natasha Crane, who, in my opinion, is one of the clearest, most knowledgeable, smartest, brilliant thinkers of our day. And we do a podcast called the Unshaken Faith podcast, where we'll take a topic, maybe a book, and we'll review the book together, or we'll just take a hot button cultural or political topic and we'll discuss it from a biblical worldview. Well, we just released an episode this past Wednesday about AI and some statistics that have been released about Christians and their interactions with AI. How many Christians actually trust AI? The answer might surprise you. How many Christians think that AI can actually help them grow spiritually? Is that true? Is that good? Is that biblical? How many Christians are actually using AI to grow spiritually? And is that even possible? Is AI everyone's new pastor? We discuss all of these questions with a couple of expert guests. So I really want to encourage you to go and listen to that episode and to subscribe to the Unshaken Faith podcast. But also, while you're at it, subscribe to Natasha Crane podcast, because I'm telling you, that is a podcast you don't want to miss. She is so brilliant. She has great guests discussing topics that are going to be so relevant to your Christian life. The other thing that I wanted to let you know about is Share the Arrows. I can't believe I haven't talked about that on the show yet. Allie Beth Stuckey puts on this amazing women's conference now for I think this is the third year we've done it. I will be presenting with Natasha Crane. We're going to be presenting together about how Christian women can be thinking about evidence for the things we believe in, how to persuade people to a biblical worldview, how to defend the biblical worldview that we hold so dear, the one that we're teaching to our kids. And we'll probably talk about that too. How can we share with our kids how to think critically, how to come to our beliefs from a place of understanding the nature of reality, the nature of truth, the nature of the Bible, all of these things. You guys, I'm so excited about this. Costi Hinn is going to be speaking along with our Rosaria Butterfield. Shane and Shane are going to be leading worship. I'm very excited for that, because one of the songs that they sang was just instrumental in keeping me on track while I was writing another gospel, and I can't wait to meet them and share that with them. So you are definitely not going to want to miss out on Share the Arrows. If you can get to Dallas on October 10th, I want to invite you to come. It is just always, every year, so encouraging. I hear stories everywhere I go of women who have gone to Share the Arrows, and it has just given them courage. It's given them encouragement. It's given them just a sense of hope to be around so many other Christian women who are pursuing Jesus, who are trying to live their faith fearlessly in a culture that is becoming increasingly more hostile to the Christian worldview. So if you think you can get there, go to sharethearrows.com today and register. I would love to see you there. It's going to be great. Again, that's sharethearrows.com. All right, I want to get to this first question, and I think this is a very insightful question, and we may spend a little bit of time on this one. But here is what this person asked. Most of the theological deconstruction sounds like the theological drift that has occurred over the past 100 years. Except for the redefinition of truth, what other redefinitions of words have you unearthed? Okay, such a good question. And let's just start with that first one, the redefinition of truth. One of the things I love to ask audiences when I speak is just take a moment, and I want to invite you to do this as well. Think about the word truth. If somebody asked you, what is truth? What does that word even mean? And it's so interesting to me, some of the responses that I often get, especially among the younger generation, among students. I will get answers ranging from, you can always tell the homeschool kids who are taught apologetics because they will actually get it right. But very often, I'll have students reply to that question, what is truth, with something like, well, truth is the consensus of a society about what is good. I had a student once say, truth is your deeply held beliefs about morality, what you believe is right and wrong. That is what truth is. A popular progressive influencer named Michael Gungor, popular in the deconstruction world. Of course, he comes from the band Gungor that was really popular in evangelical Christianity in the 90s, early 2000s. He and his wife, Lisa, have deconstructed. And on Instagram one day, somebody asked him, what is absolute truth? Like, where can I find absolute truth? And his answer was, the only place that you can find absolute truth is within yourself. And I think that really reflects our society's definition of truth, that truth is really something that you create. It is something that you have to search within yourself to find. It's not something that you discover outside of yourself. And this is actually built upon the back of a definition of truth called relativism. So what relativism says is that truth is relative. In other words, it's different. It can change based on your socioeconomic status, the environment you grew up in, maybe even your ethnicity or your biological sex, the time period in history in which you lived, your culture, your the place where you live. According to relativism, truth can be different from person to person. Therefore, it's not really fixed or absolute and the same for everybody. Now, I, of course, think that that is the wrong definition of truth, but it is the one that our culture largely holds to. So there was a study done several years ago by the Barna Group in conjunction with Impact 360, and they studied the beliefs of Gen Z. And one of the things that they found in that study is that the dominant worldview among Gen Z is what's called moral relativism. So in other words, take that definition of relativism and apply it to morality. So morality, in other words, what we should or shouldn't do, is going to be relative to each person's context, each person's place where they live, their ethnicity, their biological sex. All of these factors could make morality different from one person to another. Now, I obviously also reject that definition. I don't think that's correct. I think there are a lot of reasons we just instinctively know this. So take the idea of morality being relative. I always say this to audiences when I speak, but imagine that I'm standing here with my computer and I say, this is my computer, but somebody else comes in who's a lot bigger than me, a lot stronger than me, and maybe they even have a gun. And they say, actually, I'm going to take that computer and that's going to be my computer. Now, obviously, if nobody else is there to stop him or her, then that computer is going to belong to that other person. But the problem is that if we employ moral relativism, then nobody can actually say to that person, hey, that's wrong that you're doing that. Now, somebody could appeal to the law, they could appeal to the police, and hopefully we have good laws that would cause the police to come and maybe arrest that person, return my stolen property because we have laws of this land. But as we all know, through a cursory look at world history, not every society has always had laws that would enact such a thing. There are cultures where it's not considered frowned upon to eat other people or to do all sorts of things. But I think instinctively, we all know that doesn't work. We all know there's a higher standard that we have to appeal to. And this is actually one of the apologetic arguments for the existence of God, is that we know that morality, just instinctively, we know that morality is objective. It's not subjective or relative to each person, because if it were, then whoever has the most power, whoever has the most influence, the most ability to implement their morality, they would get to decide what is good for everybody. We all know that doesn't work. We've seen societies go into utter chaos over that definition of truth. So we know that that doesn't work with morality. Now, granted, most people in our culture don't live as if all truth is relative. Even if they might define it that way, they still go to the bank, they expect their money to be there, they still will appeal to laws in an objective way. But it's just that our culture has sort of separated separated morality and religion into this category that's more like a personal preference or an opinion, kind of like the style of clothes you might wear or what you might choose to eat in a restaurant. But this doesn't work. Relativism actually collapses on itself. It's what we call self-refuting. So I haven't even given you the correct definition of truth yet, but I just want to show you how relativism fails just logically. So if I'm going to make a statement, and I want you as the listener to think about what it would mean if the statement that I'm about to make is true, if it's real. So here's the statement. All truth is relative. So what if it's true that all truth, what if what I'm saying is true for everyone, that all truth is relative? In other words, if I make a statement like, you can't say that you know absolute truth or objective truth because it's relative to everyone. If I say all truth that you claim to know is relative, you can't claim to know these things. I want you to first notice the kind of claim that I'm making. If I make that claim, I am saying that truth is absolute because I'm telling you, you can't know truth. That's an absolute statement. That is a statement of absolute truth. All right, I'm going to get to more of that in a moment, but I want to tell you about today's first sponsor, which is so perfect because we have a huge problem in this culture, and that is that even the youngest of our kids are presented with thousands of truth claims that compete with one another every single week. This is an awesome curriculum for your kids. It's called Foundation Worldview. They have a curriculum called Biblical Worldview Curriculum that we've actually used in our home. In fact, they have all sorts of different curriculums from critical thinking to biblical sexuality, God's design for marriage. I love the Biblical Worldview curriculum because it really solves the problem of trying to sort through all of those truth claims. I've just made a bunch of truth claims to you on this episode. So in this curriculum, you, along with your child, are going to explore basic questions like, what is truth? We're going to talk about that a lot today. Who is God? How did life begin? What does it mean to be human? How can I tell right from wrong? Is morality objective or is it subjective? Is it relative? And what I love is that these curriculums can easily be implemented, whether you're doing it in your home for your devotions, your church, your Christian school, your homeschool. And this is just fabulous. This is my number one recommendation for the younger elementary age. So go to foundationworldview.com today. Use my code Alisa to save 10% on any family, church, or Christian school license. Again, that's foundationworldview.com. Use my code Alisa. All right, continuing with this idea of the redefinition of truth. So we've talked about relativism and we've talked about how it collapses on itself because if you take the claim that the statement that you're making and you apply that claim to itself, it refutes itself. So if I say all truth is relative, if it's really universally and objectively true that all truth is relative, then all truth is not relative because I've just made a statement of objective truth, absolute truth that refutes the idea that all truth is relative. Because if all truth is relative, even that statement would have to be relative, which would mean that all truth actually isn't relative. Okay, here's an easier one. My friend Frank Turek does this one all the time, and it's helpful to think about these things this way. But if somebody says there is no truth, well, what does it mean? What if it's true that there is no truth? If there is no truth, then the statement I just made is not true. So it refutes itself. So relativism really collapses on itself. And I want to give you a quote from the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. Guys, this book changed my life. Back years and years ago, when my faith was in crisis, I was very confused about what I believed. In fact, I had never thought through this question, what is truth? I just kind of assumed truth was absolute, but I didn't know why I believed that. I didn't know how to defend that. And so when I was really searching for answers for these questions, this book helped me a lot, and it's being updated and re-released. I'm so thrilled to endorse this book. I really want to recommend that you get this book. But I want to read you a story out of this book that I think demonstrates this really well. This is a story that Norm Geisler is telling. And here's the context. He says, contrary to what is being taught in many public schools, truth is not relative, but absolute. If something is true, it's true for all people, at all times, in all places. All truth claims are absolute, narrow, and exclusive. So he said, all truths exclude their opposites, even religious truths. And then he goes on. This is the story. He says, this became comically clear when a number of years ago, I debated religious humanist Michael Constantine Kalenda. Of the many atheists I debated, he was one of the few who actually read my book, Christian Apologetics, prior to the debate. When it was his turn to speak, Kalenda held up my book and declared, these Christians are very narrow-minded people. I read Dr. Geisler's book. Do you know what he believes? He believes that Christianity is true, and everything opposed to it is false. These Christians are very narrow-minded people. And then this is back to Geisler's commentary. He said, well, Kalenda had also written a book which I had read beforehand. It was titled Religion Without God, which is sort of like romance without a spouse. When it was my turn to speak, I held up Kalenda's book and declared, these humanists are very narrow-minded people. I read Dr. Kalenda's book. Do you know what he believes? He believes that humanism is true and everything opposed to it is false. These humanists are very narrow-minded people. The audience chuckled because they could see the point. Humanist truth claims are just as narrow as Christian truth claims. If humanism is true, then anything opposed to humanism is false. Likewise, if Christianity is true, then anything opposed to Christianity is false. And then he goes on to share other truths about truth. And I just want to give you some of these because these are so helpful. And obviously, as you can see, truth is not something that is relative. It's not something that changes. It's not something that you create within yourself. Truth, according to Geisler here, is discovered, not invented. It's not something that you can make up. He goes on, truth is transcultural. If it's true, it's true for everybody in all different cultures of the world. Truth is unchanging, even though our beliefs about truth can change. You can be wrong, I can be wrong, but that doesn't change what's actually true about objective reality. He goes on, beliefs cannot change a fact, no matter how sincerely they are held. Of course, more recently, this has been articulated by Ben Shapiro when he says facts don't care about your feelings. That's what he's talking about. Geisler goes on, truth is not affected by the attitude of the person professing it. This is very important because a lie can be told in a very persuasive, kind, and gracious way, but it can still be not true. On the other hand, a truth can be told by a big jerk who isn't very nice about it, but it can still be true. It's kind of independent of the person's attitude. And then Geisler goes on, and this might be his most controversial claim, but I think he's right about this. He says, all truths are absolute truths. Even truths that appear to be relative are really absolute. So, and then Frank Turek, who's the co-author here, comes in with an example here. He says, for example, I, Frank Turek, feel warm on November 20th, 2003. That may appear to be a relative truth because obviously Frank can be warm and you can be cold, but he goes on, but it is actually absolutely true for everyone, everywhere, that Frank Turek had the sensation of warmth on that day. So I think this is very helpful when we think about objective versus subjective truth. And the way I like to frame it is that when it comes to things that might be different for different people, for example, your favorite flavor of ice cream, the style of clothes that you like to wear, the team you like to cheer for, the team that is your favorite, these are what we call personal preferences or opinions. And they are still within the realm of absolute truth because if my favorite flavor of ice cream is pecan praline, then it's absolutely and objectively true for everyone, everywhere, in all cultures, in all time periods, independent of their beliefs, that that is my favorite flavor of ice cream. Now, there's no way to test in reality what the best flavor of ice cream is because best flavor is a matter of opinion. You can't actually test that in objective reality. So that's a subjective preference or opinion. But any claim that you can test in reality, things like, does God exist? Did Jesus rise from the dead? Is Christianity true? Is abortion morally wrong? Can I bench press 300 pounds? Am I wearing a black t-shirt today? These are things that can be tested in reality. These are in the realm of objective truth and can be tested. And it doesn't mean that you necessarily believe what's true about it or even can come to a knowledge of what's true about it or that you say it nicely or whatever. But it doesn't change the reality that these things are based on not the subject, not my opinion, but actually they're testable in objective reality. So that's the definition of truth, is basically as simple as this. Truth is a statement that corresponds with reality. In other words, if what I've just said corresponds with what is real, then I've told the truth. And that is not something that can change from person to person. So just to sum up, the correct definition of truth is a statement that corresponds with reality. The faulty definition, how that word has been redefined in our culture, is that truth is relative. And we are living in a culture that defines truth as being relative. So I think that's a really important point. In fact, I don't know how many of you saw the documentary by Matt Walsh, What is a Woman? I remember there being a scene where he was talking about truth and the other person was actually getting offended because he was assuming that truth was objective. In other words, unchanging and true for everyone. And the person was like, you keep invoking that word truth, almost like that word was an attack or something that was battling. And that is where the battle is in our culture right now, is that definition of truth. Let's move on to another one. Another word that is radically redefined in our culture is the word love. So if you think about this is actually going to be perfect for this question that I also received. I want to read this because this has to do with the redefinition of love. Here's what this person asked. Often, when making the effort to stand for biblical truths, I get the answer, quote, if you would demonstrate more love, kindness, that would not be an issue for you. And this was in the context of like human sexuality and LGBTQ issues. And then the questioner goes on, it can easily shut me down because suddenly, although I'm trying to be biblically correct, I'm not loving or kind. Please give me a good response to that statement. If only you were more loving or kind. All right, I'm going to get to my answer to that in just a second, but I want to tell you about our next sponsor, and that is Range Leather. If you've listened to this podcast for any amount of time, you know how much I love my Range Leather tote bag. I love my clutch that I take everywhere. It's just the perfect size to put some cash, some cards, my cell phone, a lipstick, a powder. It's perfect. But when I want to carry a few more things, I have my beautiful buttery leather tote bag from Range Leather. This is American-made craftsmanship from Wyoming. And we are living in a world of mass-produced disposables. This is where they really stand apart because every product they craft in their Laramie, Wyoming workshop is built to last a lifetime. And what I've really noticed is that the products wear in, not out. Like the more I use it, the better it looks. It just kind of gets that real character of older leather that just wears in so beautifully. And if you want to try Range Leather, I want to recommend their Horween Leather Apple Watch bands. These aren't just accessories. They're daily reminders of American craftsmanship at its finest. They have things like earrings. They have other kinds of jewelry. They have hats, trucker hats with cute leather patches. They have belts. They have a forever guarantee. So this is a lifetime guarantee on their products. And this is a Christian-owned pro-life company, guys. Go to rangeleather.com today and use my code Alisa for 15% off. Again, go to rangeleather.com and use my code Alisa for 15% off. Okay, let's get back to this question. So the question is basically when you're discussing topics like LGBTQ and you get shut down by somebody saying, you know, if you'd just be more loving, if you would just be more kind, then you would know that you should basically agree with me. Well, I want to talk about what's underlying this question is ultimately that your friend, whoever asked you this question, is defining love in a radically different way than the Bible does, and really how people have, at least in our culture, typically defined the word love. So if you think about the way that our culture defines love, I would say what is the faulty definition is a definition that would say you have to be always kind. Guys, I'm sorry, but if you read the New Testament, you're going to see that Jesus did not always fit in the mold of what we consider to be kind. He called people whitewashed tombs. He called Peter Satan. He called people wolves and dogs and pigs. He called brood of vipers people. I mean, this is Jesus who used very strong words, and he was perfect in love. One example that comes to my mind is when he encountered the rich young ruler, and the rich young ruler said, what must I do to be saved? And Jesus said, he appeals to the law, but the rich young ruler's like, oh, I'm good. I've got it. I've been practicing all of that from my youth. And then Jesus says, then sell everything you have. And what Jesus was getting at is he was trying to get to the idol in that guy's heart and basically make the point that you have to lay down everything that you want basically to follow me. You can't have anything before me. You can't worship something before me. And the Bible says the young man went away sad, but it also specifically says Jesus loved him. So Jesus actually loved someone that he let walk away, and he was kind of giving a hard word to. So love does not always mean that you have to be this kind of gushy kind. Now, should we attempt to be kind? The Bible talks all about being gracious and being seasoned with salt. Treating people with respect and gentleness. Of course, we want to embody that, but there are appropriate times that we have to say hard things and do hard things. But according to our culture, it would not be loving to not affirm someone in the life that they want to live, if it's a life that is going to be harmful to them, or a life that is sinful, a life that reflects an unrepentant sin against a holy God. Like, we as Christians, we can't affirm that. And yet the world would say that's not loving, because the world has defined love as total affirmation, acceptance, and even celebration of someone else's view. Now, recall what we were talking about with relativism, because I think we're going to see that this definition of love collapses on itself. It just doesn't work practically. And I'm going to give you an example. So a few years ago, I reviewed the book Untamed by Glennon Doyle, who was a former mommy blogger turned kind of Oprah self-help guru. And now she has written this book Untamed, where she documents the story of leaving her husband for a lesbian marriage. And I reviewed this book with, who did I review this with? Well, Melissa Doherty. We did one on her show. I reviewed this on my podcast. And I also reviewed this, I think it was on the Gospel Coalition, and it's on my blog as well. But I want to read to you her words about love. She tells a story, and it begins with this quote. I received an email recently from an old acquaintance at the church I left. It said, "Can I ask you something? I know that you and Abby love each other so much. It's really something. At the same time, I still believe that gayness is wrong. I want to be able to love you unconditionally, but I'd have to abandon my beliefs. What am I supposed to do with this God conflict?" Glennon says, I felt for her. She was saying, I want to be free to love you, but I'm caged by my beliefs. I wrote this back. First of all, thank you for knowing that you have a choice to make. Thank you for not landing on, I love you, but we know that love has no buts. If you want to change me, you do not love me. If you feel warm toward me, but also believe I'm going to burn in hell, you do not love me. If you wish me well, but vote against my family being protected by the law, you do not love me. Thank you for understanding that to love me as yourself means to want for me and for my family every good thing you want for yourself and your family. Anything less than that is less than love. So yes, I agree that you have a choice to make. You have to choose between loving me and keeping your beliefs. Thank you for being intellectually honest about that. Now, a couple of things I want to point out is that both of the women in this scenario are defining love according to culture. Even the Christian woman is saying, like, gosh, I have to choose between loving you and sticking with what God says. And I would say that you don't have to choose between those things. In fact, biblical love would implore you to not affirm something that is sinful or harmful to another person. We get this from 1 Corinthians 13. Where Paul says, if I speak in the tongues of men and angels, but I have not love, I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. Now notice, if we interpret the definition of love through the cultural lens, then what this verse would be saying is, if I speak with tongues of men and angels, but don't affirm and celebrate everyone with kindness all the time, then I'm a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And I can see why this would be very confusing for a lot of Christians who maybe have uncritically adopted a faulty definition of love. But as we go on in this passage, we see that is not what Paul is saying. He says, love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. It is not arrogant or rude. These are important things. We as Christians should really take these deeply within ourselves. Paul goes on, it does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. But here we go. He says, it does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. So we talked about truth, 3 definition. We're talking about love. Now think about this. If you're the enemy of humanity, if you're the devil himself, you're going to want to redefine the words truth and the words love. If you can do that, then you've hoodwinked most Christians into a false worldview. So notice that Paul says, love does not rejoice in wrongdoing. Love has to draw a line in the sand about right and wrong. We can't redefine morality to be relative. We can't redefine love to mean affirmation, celebration of every life and every kind of way that people want to live. That doesn't mean we're rude. We don't need to be rude. We don't need to be arrogant about it. We shouldn't be envious or boastful. But in love, we have to oppose what is evil. That's the biblical requirement. The biblical definition of love is based on God's nature and character. The Bible says that God is love. Like he is love itself. We have a word love to describe who God is. Now, I want to just go to the example of Jesus as we ponder these words of Glennon Doyle, where she's basically saying, thank you for realizing you have a choice to make. Now notice I think this is very hypocritical. She says, you have to choose between loving me and keeping your beliefs. But notice how that only goes one way. She is saying her friend has to do that. You have to change your beliefs to love me, but will not allow the other one to say the same thing to her. So who gets to choose? So this is very hypocritical because typically when people redefine the word love, whether they're doing it knowingly or unknowingly, they are saying this only goes one way. Like you, Christian, you have to change your beliefs. You have to compromise your morality to agree with me if you want to say that you love me. But notice that Glennon isn't applying that standard to herself and saying to herself, well, hey, if I'm asking my friend to change her biblical position on this, I'm asking her to change. But she, of course, still thinks she's being loving. But notice she said just before that, if you want to change me, you do not love me, yet she's trying to change her friend. And to settle the debate here, like who gets to win this? Is it the friend that is trying to change her or her trying to change her friend? Which one represents love? Well, let's go to love itself, which is Jesus. Friends, Jesus wants to change you. Jesus wants to change everything about you. He wants you to be transformed and conformed into his image. It's one of the things he prayed in John 17. In fact, he specifically said, I'm not just praying for my disciples that are here in front of me, but for those who will believe based on their testimony, which is you and me. And he says, sanctify them by your word. Your word is truth. So truth and love are unable to be separated. Truth and love go together. It's not like, I don't even necessarily love the way we think about it, like be truthful, but also be loving. I mean, they're literally the same thing. Love does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but love rejoices in the truth. And very quickly, I want to just touch on the words authenticity and tolerance, because those are also words that are radically redefined in our culture. Think about the word authenticity. What did it classically mean? It meant being real, being genuine, not being fake. I think that definition is good. And based on that, I think it's biblical for Christians to be authentic, right? We shouldn't be pretending to be somebody else. In fact, that's really what a hypocrite is. That word that it comes from in the Greek that's translated into English has to do with play acting. It's something actors did. We don't want to be fake like that. We want to be genuine. We want to confess our sins to one another, walk with one another, not pretend like we have to have everything together, and then encourage one another towards sanctification. I would say that's true Christian authenticity, but that's not how our culture defines authenticity. Our culture defines authenticity based on your feelings, like what you feel is who you are. And with that, I'll go to this question because this really, I think, nails this one on the head. And here's the question I got. It said, I have a granddaughter who wants to be called he, him. The parents insist we go along with this when they visit. It's very awkward. She, in quotations, still dresses very femininely, but insists on this, 17-year-old. So how do I handle this? See, I think even this questioner is confused by putting she in the quotations because this is from the question, it looks like it's a biological female that wants to be called he, him at 17 years old. And so what's underneath this question is a misdefinition of the word authenticity. This is being defined like my true authentic self is what I feel I am. And in the case of this young girl, she feels as though she's a boy. So therefore, to not go along with that is to deny her true authentic self, which she believes is male. And so I would just say to this sweet grandparent couple, first realize that they're defining authenticity very differently. They're defining love differently. They're defining truth differently. All of these build on one another. And my encouragement to you as a grandparent is to watch a lot of detransition stories where you have people like Clementine Breen, Chloe Cole, who were taken through medical interventions that did irreversible damage to their bodies when they were younger. And now they're suing their doctors. They are angry at the people who went along with this. And we know that what is when we're doing pronouns, when we're affirming before there's medical stuff, that's called social transition. We know that the pipeline from social transition to medical transition is like a straight, short line. So if you are the only people in this young woman's life that are not going along with it, not only will you be on the side of truth, but you could potentially be the person years later that she returns to and says, thank you. Thank you for being the only person in my life that stood between me and evil. And maybe that won't happen. But our job as Christians is to not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoice in the truth. And obviously pray through this with people who can walk with you. And I'm hesitant to give any more advice that would be extremely specific because I don't know the specifics of all of the situation. But I would just encourage you that love does not rejoice in wrongdoing. Love rejoices in the truth. We can't affirm something that is not true or that is actually potentially and even imminently harmful for someone else. So again, counsel with your pastor, pray with one another, ask the Lord to give you wisdom. The Holy Spirit will lead and guide you. And I would just encourage everybody listening to this to pray for this couple and all the other couples. There are so many people that are facing this question. All right, very quickly, I want to do tolerance. Tolerance, classically defined, meant that you disagree with somebody, but you are going to give them the right to have their say. You're not going to beat them up. You're not going to throw them in jail because they said their opinion. So you tolerate, by definition, tolerance requires disagreement. But that is not how our culture defines tolerance. Tolerance is defined, again, kind of like love, which is full acceptance and affirmation of every kind of thing that somebody would want to do. I would say unless you're a Christian. If you're a conservative Christian, this does not apply to you, but that's kind of how our culture is defining tolerance these days. So a good question that you can ask somebody when they come to you with maybe some of these questions we've even talked through, like when somebody says you should be loving, you should be kind. I think a great question to ask somebody is, do you consider yourself to be a tolerant person? And then if they answer yes, then you could politely ask, well, then would you tolerate my diverse opinion on this, Or, and you're highlighting, you're bringing them back to their supposed ethic, which is tolerance. And if tolerance is truly going to be practiced, then it would apply to the Christian as well. And so by asking that question, you're kind of resetting the conversation. So if somebody's asking you, like, what do you think about this? Or what do you think about that? And there are these hot button issues that they know you're going to disagree with them on. I think that's a great place to start. Do you consider yourself a tolerant person? And with that, we're going to go to our final sponsor of the day, which is 7 Weeks Coffee. You guys know how much I love 7 Weeks Coffee. They are America's pro-life coffee company. They're on a mission to fund the pro-life movement, one cup of coffee at a time. They donate 10% of every sale to pro-life centers all across the country. And thanks to so many of you who have bought 7 Weeks Coffee or subscribed to the Heartbeat Club, where you get your coffee beans every single month, they have been able to raise over $1 million, which translates into saving thousands of lives. And not only are you donating to such a great cause, but you're getting like the best coffee you're ever going to have. I love that this coffee is mold-free, pesticide-free, shade-grown, low-acid, organically farmed, direct trade acquired. It checks all the boxes. Go to 7weekscoffee.com today and save 15% forever when you subscribe. Plus, you'll get a free gift with your order. And for my listeners, if you use the code Alisa, you're going to get an extra 10% off your first order. So that's a 25% total savings on your first order plus that free gift. Just use the code Alisa at checkout. Again, that's 7weekscoffee.com. Use my code Alisa. All right, we're going to go to this final word here that I think is so vital that we understand, and that is the redefinition of the word justice. Justice is the possibly most abused word in our culture. And before I get to the faulty definition of that one, I want to talk about the biblical definition, okay? Because we as Christians need to define this word biblically because it's another one of those words that is based on the nature and character of God. And it's a topic that the Bible takes very seriously all throughout the Old and the New Testaments. Justice is very important to God, and it's very important to God that his people practice justice. So we have to understand what it is we're talking about. And again, if I'm the enemy of humanity, that's a great word to redefine to get to people to do evil in the name of a good word like justice. So let's talk through just the attitude of justice in the Bible. Of course, we're all probably familiar with this passage by now, Micah 6:8, which says, "He has told you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God." Isaiah 1:17 says, "Learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause." Isaiah 30:18 says, "For the Lord is a God of justice. Blessed are all those who wait for him." Psalm 89:14 says, "Righteousness and justice are the foundation of your throne. Steadfast love and faithfulness go before you." When I was studying this word justice in the Bible, one thing I learned is that the words righteousness in English and justice in English are both derived from the same Hebrew root word. So they're in certain ways they're interchangeable. God's justice is his righteousness. And so I think what we see emerge as the Bible talks about justice is it's this idea of justice being blind, right? And this goes all the way back to Aristotle. This is how Aristotle defined justice, was giving someone their due. So in other words, you're not giving favoritism to someone. You're not more harshly punishing one person versus another based on some unequal weight and measure. Everybody kind of gets the same shake, the same opportunities and a fair shot. And in that sense, justice is blind. And there's this sense of impartiality. Deuteronomy 1:17 says, "You shall not be partial in judgment. You shall hear the small and the great alike. You shall not be intimidated by anyone, for judgment is God's." So the emerging themes that we get from the Old and the New Testament is that justice is impartial, that there is correct punishments for crimes and appropriate rewards for good behavior. Think about the Old Testament system. It was assumed that people had personal property. The idea of justice wasn't that everybody all has the same stuff, but the same laws applied to everyone. So if your ox fell in a ditch, you had to do this. Or if this happened to your neighbor's house because of one of your animals, you had to do this. So there was a just punishment. In fact, different sins had different levels of punishment, and different behaviors had different rewards. Justice biblically is defined as doing what is right, practicing righteousness. 1 John 3:7 says, "Let no one, little children, let no one deceive you. Whoever practices righteousness is righteous as he is righteous." There's also this sense of correcting oppression. There's a huge theme of defending widows, pleading the widow's cause, being there for the fatherless, the orphan, the widow. This is Old and New Testament. So when someone is being actually oppressed, our job is to speak for them. I think a huge application of that in today's context is the issue of abortion, where we have millions of humans who are made in the image and likeness of God, who are being killed in the womb, who can't speak for themselves. I think this is a biblical application of justice that we need to speak for them. We need to do everything we can to correct that type of oppression. Now, I want to talk about Lady Justice. Maybe you've seen the picture of Lady Justice with the blindfold on. And this, again, is kind of how even all throughout Western culture, justice has been defined as this impartial kind of giving fairness where giving somebody their due, whether it's punishment or reward. Now, this is an article that I found on Harvard Law. So this is an op-ed, and it's very interesting because it's commenting on Lady Justice with that blindfold on. And it says this: that blindfold is supposed to symbolize impartiality. It represents our strict subscription to the notion that impartiality and objectivity are the principles upon which our system is built and by which it is protected. That this notion that justice is blind is one rooted in equality. Now, I think this is great. So far, so good, but then it goes on. But it says justice should not always be blind. Rather than prioritizing equal treatment, sometimes justice demands that we treat individuals differently to ensure equal outcomes. This notion of justice is rooted in the principle of equity. So here we get the difference between equality, which has to do with equal opportunities, just punishments based, not based on your socioeconomic standard. We're going to give the same punishment for the same crime to the rich person as to the poor person. That would be equality. Equity is when you now begin to treat people differently to ensure that everybody has the same outcome. And then the quote that I pulled ends with this, quote, put simply, equity takes fairness as its aim, where equality entails the equal, for example, impartial treatment of individuals. Equity demands a nuanced approach to ensure equal outcomes. And this is ultimately the definition of what we call social justice in our culture, which is defined as the fair division of resources, opportunities, and privileges in society. So where biblical justice would be correct punishments, correct rewards, treating everybody fairly, equal weights and measures, not giving partiality to the rich person over the poor person. Social justice would say it's like there's this pie, and we're going to make sure that everybody has an equal piece of the pie, even if we have to take a piece from one person to give it to another. So that's the difference between biblical justice and social justice. Vodi Bakum kind of arranged the principles of social justice according to these 4 principles. So he said, and I think this is very helpful, he said, the mission of social justice is, number 1, to identify disadvantaged groups. Number 2, assess group outcomes. Number 3, assign blame for disparate outcomes. And number 4, redistribute power and resources. Now, that might sound good on its face, but that's actually really an unbiblical way to go about things. And I'll give you a perfect example. There are all sorts of moral issues in our culture that are being assigned under this justice category. Right here, I'm looking at the website for gender justice. It says advancing gender equity. Now, again, remember, equity means everybody gets the same outcome through the law. And then right under that, it says trans athletes belong in sports. Add your name. And it's a petition for you to add your name to make sure, ultimately, that biological males can compete in female sports under the banner of justice. And this is why social justice is so unbiblical and so wrong, because it's importing all kinds of cultural categories. It's denying objective truth. It's redefining love. It's redefining authenticity as your feelings, right? Your true authentic self is that you're female, so you should be able to compete with females. And it's redefining tolerance, basically. Like, you have to tolerate this, all under the banner of justice, and more specifically, gender justice. So how you think about justice is going to determine how you come to this question. It's going to determine what you think about stories like Clementine Breen, who had been through sexual trauma as a child and then became confused, thinking maybe she was the opposite sex. And she shared this with a counselor who then, through a series of events, was put into the pipeline of having a double mastectomy at 14. And now she's suing her doctors because what she realizes today is that she had unresolved trauma. She isn't a man trapped in a woman's body. She had trauma that needed to be addressed. But under the banner of justice, she was put in this pipeline and now has irreversible damage done to her body. That's why I really encourage people to listen to these detransition stories, because a lot of this is being done under the banner of social justice. We have gender affirming care. Isn't that a positive sounding word? Doesn't that sound like a good justice thing to do? But gender affirming care does not mean that you're making sure that female spaces are protected, that we don't allow men into women's locker rooms to watch them change. No, gender affirming care means the opposite. In fact, I took this from the Human Rights Campaign, and it said every person has the fundamental right to access the health care they need without fear of discrimination, prejudice, or barriers to treatment that supports their mental, physical, and emotional well-being. That sounds great, except that what we're talking about is we're neglecting the what is actual justice, which would be to protect females from men being in their sports or in their locker rooms or their bathrooms. And it says here, gender affirming care is a broad approach to healthcare and support that recognizes and respects an individual's gender identity. Like, this is under the banner of justice. It goes on, ensuring that all individuals can live healthy, fulfilling lives by addressing their unique needs. Now, we live in a country where everyone has the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, unless your pursuit of happiness is oppressing someone else. But under the banner of social justice, that's all out the window, because we are seeing females getting injured by biological males being allowed to compete in their sports. We're seeing all sorts of things happen. And I'm not saying that it always happens, but we have to protect females. And so how you approach this topic is going to be determined by whether or not you define justice biblically or according to social norms. Let's talk about reproductive justice, right? This is a term that is the new term. Well, it's not so new, but for pro-abortion, right? It used to be pro-choice. Now it's reproductive justice, because our culture has brought this under the banner of justice. So justice, when applied culturally, can lead actually to great evil in the name of justice. And the Bible talks about in Isaiah, people who call evil good and good evil. It says, woe unto them that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. I want to read you some Bible verses about this, because they, hopefully with what we've talked about with justice, this will make sense. Proverbs 28:5 says this. Think about our culture today. This is so apropos. Evil men do not understand justice, but those who seek the Lord understand it completely. Get this one, Proverbs 21:15. When justice is done, it is a joy to the righteous, but terror to evildoers. So when we're talking about justice, I think it is so important that we don't uncritically accept the cultural definition of justice, which is ultimately kind of based on Marxism. It goes back to the economic theory that was going to redistribute wealth to make sure everybody had the same outcome. And now that definition of justice is applied to everything. And it's not biblical, and it's actually harmful to people. And there are very real victims of this incorrect definition of justice. Okay. With that, we will call it a day. Thank you so much for listening. And let's remember, as we pursue Christ, let's keep a sharp mind, a soft heart, and a thick skin.